The aroma of roasted turkey, sage stuffing, and my late husband's famous cranberry sauce always filled my home on Thanksgiving. It was a ritual, a comfort, a testament to the life Tom and I had built together, and one I'd faithfully continued for decades. My name is Margaret Lewis, and at 74, I still found joy in these moments, even if the joy felt a little different now. I moved around the kitchen, a familiar dance, pulling warm rolls from the oven, my hands still nimble despite the years. The laughter from the dining room, where my son, Thomas, his wife, Sarah, and their son, Jacob, were already gathered, was music to my ears. "Grandma, these rolls are incredible." Jacob, my grandson, called out, his 16-year-old voice cracking slightly. He was a good boy, Jacob, bright and full of life, though sometimes a bit too quiet when his mother was around. I smiled, carrying the gravy boat to the table. "Glad you like them, sweetheart. Your grandpa always loved them." Thomas, my son, at 50, looked up from carving the turkey. "Mom, you outdid yourself again. What would we do without you?" He meant it, I think, but the words felt lighter than they used to. More of a pleasantry than a genuine question. Sarah, 45, my daughter-in-law, was already on her phone, occasionally glancing up to offer a saccharine smile. "Honestly, Margaret, you're a lifesaver. This spread is divine." She'd been particularly effusive since I'd helped her expand her little online boutique last spring, covering the initial inventory costs and a new website design. It had been a substantial sum, but I'd always believed in supporting family. My contributions weren't just limited to holiday feasts or business ventures. Jacob's private school tuition for the last few years, that was me. The family's trip to Hawaii 2 summers ago, a surprise for Thomas and Sarah's anniversary, my treat. Even the down payment on their current house had come from Tom's and my savings years ago. I never kept score, not really. It was just what you did for family. It was love expressed in the most practical way I knew how. Beyond the financial, there was the emotional labor. When Jacob was little, I was the one who got the late-night calls for babysitting when Sarah had a girls' night out. I was always available for advice, whether it was about Thomas's career choices or Jacob's school troubles. I was the family's anchor, the one who listened, who remembered birthdays, who sent cards, who held everyone's stories. It was a role I cherished, a quiet power I held. Dinner progressed with the usual chatter. Jacob talked about his soccer team, Thomas about a new project at work, and Sarah, of course, about her boutique's latest sales figures. I mostly listened, interjecting with a question or a fond memory. As dessert was served, my homemade apple pie, Sarah excused herself to take a call, stepping into the living room. I started clearing plates, a habit I couldn't break, even when Thomas offered half-heartedly to help. As I carried a stack of plates to the kitchen, I heard Sarah's voice, hushed but clear from the living room. She wasn't on a call after all. She was talking to someone, likely a friend, on speaker. "Oh, it was fine, you know," she said, her tone dismissive. "Another one of Margaret's big dinners. She really goes all out. Honestly, sometimes I think she just wants to remind us who holds the purse strings. But hey, it's all going to Thomas eventually, right? So we just smile and let her do her thing." There was a light, almost mocking laugh. "It's not like she's going to take it with her." The clatter of plates in my hands suddenly felt deafening. The warmth of the kitchen, the lingering scent of spices, all seemed to chill. My daughter-in-law, Sarah, talking about my inheritance, my efforts, my life's work, as if I were already gone, a mere formality standing between them and what they considered theirs. The laughter from the dining room, once music, now sounded distant, almost hollow. A subtle shift, yes, but it was a crack in the foundation I hadn't noticed before, and it stung. The weeks following Thanksgiving blurred into a quiet hum of routine. But the echo of Sarah's dismissive words lingered. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just an offhand comment, perhaps taken out of context, but a seed of doubt had been planted, and it began to sprout in small, unsettling ways. One crisp Saturday afternoon, about a month after the holiday dinner, I drove over to Thomas and Sarah's house for what I thought was a casual family lunch. I'd brought a freshly baked lemon meringue pie, knowing it was Jacob's favorite. When I arrived, the house was already buzzing. Thomas, Sarah, and Jacob were huddled in the living room, heads together, laughing at something on Sarah's phone. Their voices were animated, a tight little circle of shared amusement. I stood in the entryway for a moment, pie in hand, feeling like an unexpected delivery rather than a cherished guest. "Oh, Mom, you're here," Thomas said, finally noticing me, his smile a little too bright, a little too quick. "Come on in. We were just looking at some old photos." I tried to join them, peering over Jacob's shoulder at the screen, but the moment had passed. They exchanged a look, a subtle shift in their posture, and the easy camaraderie evaporated. The inside joke remained just that, inside. I felt like an outsider looking in, a feeling that was becoming increasingly familiar. Later, as we sat around the kitchen island, discussing plans for Jacob's upcoming 16th birthday party, the conversation turned to the budget. I mentioned a few ideas I had for a nice restaurant, offering to look into reservations. Sarah waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, Margaret, can't you just let the young ones handle it? We've got it all under control. Jacob wants something trendier. You wouldn't really understand." Her tone was light, but the implication was clear. I was old, out of touch, and my input wasn't wanted. I felt the familiar sting, a prickle of heat behind my eyes, but I swallowed it down. "Of course, dear. Whatever Jacob wants. I just want him to have a wonderful birthday." I tried to sound agreeable, to show I wasn't offended, even though I was. I still believed this was a phase, a natural part of my children growing older and wanting more independence. The exclusions continued. Jacob had a big soccer game, the championship, and I'd always been his biggest fan, cheering from the sidelines, bringing orange slices and water bottles. I called Thomas to ask about the time, but he mumbled something about it being a small, team-only event, not really for spectators. Later, I saw Sarah's social media posts, photos of her, Thomas, and Jacob celebrating on the field, surrounded by other parents. My heart ached. It wasn't just about the game. It was about being left out, deliberately. I started to notice how often I was the last to know things, or not told at all. Family decisions, plans for holidays, even small updates about Jacob's school life. I'd hear snippets through Jacob himself, or sometimes from Thomas, always after the fact. It was as if I was being slowly, subtly, nudged to the periphery. I'd always been the one to organize, to facilitate, to bring everyone together. Now, I was just there. Then came the jarring moment. It was a Tuesday evening, and I called Thomas to see if he wanted to come over for dinner. He declined, saying they had plans to discuss something important. A few hours later, I was scrolling through my news feed, and a post from Sarah popped up. It was a photo of her, Thomas, and Jacob, all beaming, holding up brochures for a resort in the Caribbean. The caption read, "So excited for our next family adventure. Who needs snow when you have sunshine? Caribbean-bound family vacation." My breath hitched. The Caribbean. I remembered funding their Hawaii trip, their first big family vacation. I had always been the one to make these trips possible, to ensure they had these experiences. There was no mention of me, no invitation, not even a casual, "We're planning a trip." It was just their family adventure. The image of them, a tight, smiling unit, without me, was a punch to the gut. The casual entitlement I'd noticed at Thanksgiving had solidified into outright exclusion. This wasn't just a phase anymore. This was a pattern. The Caribbean vacation news had been a cold shower, but I still clung to the hope that Jacob's 16th birthday would be different. A milestone like that, a sweet 16, surely that was sacred. I pushed aside the lingering hurt, reminding myself that my love for Jacob was unconditional, and I wanted to celebrate him. The party was planned for a Saturday night, a few weeks after the Caribbean reveal, at a trendy Italian restaurant downtown, the kind Sarah had said I wouldn't understand. I'd made sure to buy Jacob a thoughtful gift, a vintage watch I knew he'd appreciate, and I dressed carefully, in a dress I hadn't worn in years, hoping to look my best. I left my house early, wanting to arrive a little before the reservation time, just in case. The restaurant was in a bustling part of the city, and I anticipated a bit of a challenge finding parking. The evening air was cool, crisp, and filled with the distant sounds of city life. I felt a flutter of excitement, a familiar warmth spreading through me at the thought of celebrating my grandson. Maybe, just maybe, this would be a turning point. Maybe they'd realize how much I missed being truly part of things. I found a parking spot a block away and started walking, my new dress shoes clicking softly on the pavement. As I approached the restaurant, I saw Thomas's car already parked right out front, and Sarah's distinctive SUV next to it. Good, I thought, I'm not too early. I was about to head to the entrance when Sarah spotted me from the doorway, where she was talking animatedly with Thomas. Her smile, usually so bright, faltered for a split second before she plastered it back on. She hurried over, her designer scarf fluttering. "Oh, Margaret, you're here. Great, great." Her voice was a little too high-pitched, a little too forced. She glanced around nervously, then leaned in conspiratorially. "Listen, Mom, there's a bit of a situation. The restaurant is absolutely packed tonight, and they're really strict about the reservation size. We're already pushing it with the number of people we have." My brow furrowed. "But I'm on the reservation, aren't I? I confirmed with Thomas earlier this week." She wrung her hands. "Well, yes, but they just called. A last-minute change. They said they can only accommodate exactly our party size, and we have a few of Jacob's friends who just showed up. You know how important his friends are to him on his big night." She paused, then delivered the blow with a practiced, regretful sigh. "Would you mind, terribly, just waiting in the car for a bit? We'll call you as soon as there's room. It shouldn't be long, I promise. just until one of his friends leaves or something. My heart sank, a cold, heavy stone in my chest. Wait in the car? Like a child or a chauffeur. The words echoed the dismissive tone I'd heard on Thanksgiving, the exclusions from the soccer game, the Caribbean trip. It was a pattern, a carefully constructed one. I looked past her, through the restaurant's large glass window. I could see Jacob inside, laughing with his friends, completely oblivious. Thomas stood behind Sarah, avoiding my gaze, fiddling with his phone. "Oh," I managed, the single syllable catching in my throat. The excitement I'd felt moments ago evaporated, replaced by a chilling dread. This wasn't a last-minute change. This was planned. I saw the subtle glances exchanged between Thomas and Sarah, the way they seemed to brace themselves for my reaction. They had set a trap, and I, blinded by my enduring love and hope, had walked right into it. "It's just for a little while, Mom," Thomas finally chimed in, his voice low, still not meeting my eyes. "We'll be right out to get you." I nodded, unable to speak, my throat tight. The vintage watch, carefully wrapped in my purse, suddenly felt like a burden. I turned, my new shoes now dragging on the pavement, and walked back to my car. As I started the engine, the glow of the restaurant sign seemed to mock me, its bright lights illuminating the cheerful faces inside, a world I was now excluded from. I sat there, the engine idling, the dread solidifying into a painful certainty. I was waiting in the car, an unwanted guest, completely unaware of the true devastation that was about to unfold. I sat in my car, the engine running, the warmth of the heater doing little to thaw the chill spreading through me. The restaurant's facade, a cheerful beacon of light and laughter, felt like a cruel taunt. I watched the shadows of people moving inside, imagining Jacob blowing out candles, surrounded by his friends and family, my family, but I wasn't with them. I was out here, waiting, just as Sarah had instructed. Minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity. 10 minutes, 20, no call, no text. The humiliation began to burn, a slow, steady ember in my gut. Had they forgotten about me? Or worse, had they never intended to call? The dread I'd felt earlier solidified into a sickening certainty. I was being played. Unable to simply sit there any longer, a desperate need for confirmation, for understanding, propelled me out of the car. I couldn't just leave without knowing. I walked back towards the restaurant, my heart pounding, a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I wouldn't go in, I told myself. Just a quick glance, to see if they were still there, to see if they were looking for me. I approached the large window again, trying to be discreet, peering through the slight gap in the curtains. And that's when I saw them, my family. They were all at a large round table, laden with plates and glasses. Jacob was indeed beaming, opening presents. Thomas was laughing, his arm around Sarah. They looked like the picture of a happy family, a family without me. Then a fragment of conversation drifted through the slightly ajar window, carried on a gust of wind, cutting through the general restaurant din like a knife. It was Sarah's voice, clear and sharp. "Honestly, I can't believe she actually waited in the car," she chuckled, a brittle, unpleasant sound. "I told Thomas she would. She always comes back, doesn't she? The old lady with the money." My breath hitched. The old lady with the money, not Mom, not Grandma, just a walking ATM. Thomas's voice, softer but still audible, followed. "Well, what did you expect? She's not really part of the family anymore, not in the way she used to be. It's just easier this way, less fuss. And then the most devastating blow. Jacob's voice, my sweet grandson, usually so kind. Yeah, I mean, it's my party. I just wanted to hang out with my friends. Grandma always makes things a little formal. He sounded almost apologetic, but the words still twisted in my gut. Exactly, Sarah purred, a triumphant note in her voice. Let her sit in the car. She'll always come back to us. She has nowhere else to go. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. My vision blurred, tears welling in my eyes, hot and stinging. Humiliation washed over me, a tidal wave of shame and betrayal. They had planned this. They had mocked me. They had dismissed me, not just as an inconvenience, but as someone utterly insignificant, someone who would always return because I was desperate for their affection. My hand instinctively went to my neck, clutching the smooth, cool surface of Tom's silver pendant, a small, engraved locket he'd given me on our 25th anniversary. It was a reflex, a desperate search for comfort, for the love of the one man who had truly cherished me. But even his presence, usually so soothing, felt distant tonight. A fierce, cold anger began to simmer beneath the pain. It wasn't just sadness anymore. It was a burning indignation, a primal need to reclaim what they had so carelessly trampled. Nowhere else to go. They thought I was weak, dependent, a predictable source of funds and emotional labor. They thought I would just take it. My fists clenched, my nails digging into my palms. The tears were still falling, but they were no longer tears of despair. They were tears of rage, of a profound, shattering realization. I turned away from the window, my back ramrod straight, and walked with a newfound purpose back to my car. As I started the engine and pulled out of the parking spot, leaving the restaurant and my betrayers behind, a vow formed in my mind, sharp and clear. I would take back control. Every single penny, every ounce of respect, every shred of my dignity. They had underestimated me, and they would regret it. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and simmering fury. I pulled into my driveway, the familiar comfort of my house feeling alien, tainted by the betrayal that had just unfolded. The silence inside was deafening, a stark contrast to the raucous laughter I'd left behind. I walked through the living room, past the dining table, where so many family dinners had taken place, the very table where I'd overheard Sarah's first dismissive comments. Now, it felt like a monument to my own foolish generosity. I sank onto the sofa, still in my dress, the vintage watch for Jacob still heavy in my purse. The shock began to wear off, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. The old lady with the money. She'll always come back to us. She has nowhere else to go. Their words replayed in my mind, each one a fresh stab. I stared at the empty dining table, imagining their faces, their casual cruelty. It wasn't just Sarah anymore. Thomas, my own son, had enabled it, and even Jacob, my beloved grandson, had contributed to my dismissal. The weight of it all was crushing. For a long time, I just sat there, numb. Then my phone buzzed. It was Sarah. My finger hovered over the screen, a primal urge to answer, to demand an explanation, to unleash the torrent of hurt and anger. But a different instinct, a new, protective one, took over. I declined the call. The phone buzzed again, then a third time. I let them all go to voicemail. It was a small act, but it felt monumental. It was the first time I hadn't immediately jumped to their beck and call. The next morning, the house felt stifling. I needed air, space, a place where their voices couldn't reach me. I put on my walking shoes and headed to the park a few blocks away, a place I often went for quiet reflection. The crisp winter air bit at my cheeks, but the physical sensation was a welcome distraction from the turmoil in my mind. As I walked, the events of the previous night replayed, but this time I saw them with new eyes. It wasn't just Jacob's birthday. It was the soccer game, the Caribbean trip, Sarah's business, Jacob's tuition, the casual remarks, the subtle exclusions, the way they'd always assumed I'd pay. I'd help. I'd be there. I'd brush them off, rationalizing them as simple oversights or the natural progression of a family growing up. But now it was clear. These weren't isolated incidents. They were patterns, a carefully constructed web of manipulation woven with my own generosity as its threads. They hadn't just taken my money, they had taken my dignity, my place, my very identity within the family. As I rounded a bend in the path, I saw Mrs. Henderson, a friendly neighbor from 2 streets over, sitting on a bench, bundled in a thick coat, feeding the pigeons. She was a sweet woman, always had a kind word. She looked up and smiled, then her brow furrowed slightly as she took in my face. "Margaret, dear, are you all right?" she asked, her voice gentle. "You look a bit, pale." I tried to force a smile, but it felt brittle. "Just a long night, Mrs. Henderson." She patted the spot next to her. "Come, sit for a moment. The sun is lovely, even if it's cold." I hesitated, then sat. The warmth of her presence was surprisingly comforting. "It was Jacob's birthday last night," I found myself saying, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. And then, to my own surprise, I told her, not everything, not the cruelest words, but enough about being asked to wait in the car, about the feeling of being an afterthought. Mrs. Henderson listened, her kind eyes full of understanding. She didn't offer platitudes or try to fix it. She just listened. When I finished, she simply squeezed my gloved hand. "Oh, Margaret," she said softly, that's just not right. You've given that family everything." She paused, then looked me directly in the eye. "You know, my mother always said, sometimes the best way to show people what they've lost is to give them a taste of life without you. You're a strong woman, Margaret. Don't let them make you forget that." Her words, simple and direct, resonated deeply. They weren't about anger or revenge, but about self-respect, about recognizing my own worth. As I walked home, a new kind of resolve began to stir within me, a quiet, steady flame. I had given them everything, yes, but I still had something left, and it was time to reclaim it. Mrs. Henderson's words echoed in my mind for days. Give them a taste of life without you. The idea, once unthinkable, now felt like a necessary truth. I had spent my entire adult life giving, nurturing, supporting. It was time to nurture myself. The first step, I realized, was to understand the full scope of my own position. I started with Tom's will. After his passing, everything had been handled by his attorney, Mr. Davies, a kind, meticulous man who had been a family friend for years. I remembered signing documents, but the details had been a blur of grief. Now, with a clear head and a steelier resolve, I pulled out the heavy, leather-bound folder from the back of my desk drawer. Inside, among old insurance policies and property deeds, was Tom's meticulously crafted estate plan. My heart began to race as I read through the documents. Tom, ever the planner, had ensured I was thoroughly protected. Not only did I have full control over all our joint assets, but he had also set up several trusts, all with me as the sole trustee and primary beneficiary. The sheer extent of my financial and legal power was staggering. The house was mine, outright. My investments, substantial and carefully managed over the years, were solely in my name. There were no clauses that immediately transferred anything to Thomas or Jacob upon Tom's death, only provisions for them after my passing, and even those were contingent on my own discretion. It was a revelation. For years, I had simply acted as the family's benevolent benefactor, dipping into what I thought of as our money for their needs. But it wasn't our money in the way they perceived it. It was my money. My rightful control was absolute. As I absorbed this, memories flooded back, each one a sharp, painful reminder of their dependence. Sarah's business loan, which I'd transferred directly from my personal account. Jacob's tuition, paid quarterly from my investment dividends. The Hawaii trip, booked on my credit card, then paid off from my savings. The down payment on Thomas and Sarah's house. A check I'd written from my late husband's and my joint account, now solely mine. They hadn't just relied on my generosity. They had relied on my assets that were entirely under my control. It suddenly felt less like altruism and more like overreach, a power I had unknowingly wielded and they had so carelessly abused. The next morning, I made an appointment with Mr. Davies. His office was quiet, filled with the scent of old paper and leather. He greeted me warmly, his kind eyes belying his sharp legal mind. I explained, as calmly as I could, the situation. I didn't go into the emotional details of the birthday party, but I made it clear that I wanted to review my estate plan and understand all my options. Mr. Davies listened patiently, nodding occasionally. He treated me with an unwavering respect, a stark contrast to the dismissiveness I'd grown accustomed to from my own family. He laid out my financial landscape with clarity, confirming everything I had read in Tom's will. Margaret, he said, leaning forward slightly, you are in a very strong position. Your late husband was very thorough. You have complete discretion over your assets, both now and in terms of your eventual estate planning. He then explained the various ways I could restructure my will, establish trusts, or even set up a foundation. He spoke of beneficiaries, trustees, and the legal implications of each choice. It was empowering. He wasn't just confirming my power. He was showing me how to wield it, how to protect myself, and how to direct my resources in a way that truly reflected my values. Leaving his office, I felt a surge of adrenaline, a potent mix of anger and liberation. I spent the next few days meticulously gathering evidence of my contributions, bank statements showing tuition payments, receipts for the Hawaii trip, documentation of the funds transferred for Sarah's business, the old deed for Thomas and Sarah's house, clearly showing the down payment source, Tom's will, highlighting my absolute control. Each piece of paper was a quiet testament to my generosity, and now a concrete foundation for my resolve. I wasn't just feeling hurt anymore. I was armed with facts and the knowledge of my true power, armed with Mr. Davies' advice and a stack of undeniable evidence. I felt a transformation begin. The hurt was still there, a dull ache, but it was now overshadowed by a steely resolve. I was no longer the Margaret who would silently absorb slights. I was Margaret, the woman who had built a life, who had assets, and who had the power to direct them as she saw fit. My first decisive action was to update my will. Mr. Davies guided me through the process, ensuring my wishes were legally sound and clearly articulated. I restructured everything, ensuring that my assets would be distributed in a way that truly reflected my values, focusing on empowering my grandchildren rather than simply gifting them unearned wealth. I also changed the access to my various accounts. Sarah no longer had the ability to borrow from my savings for her business, nor would automatic payments for Jacob's tuition continue without my explicit approval for each installment. The tap, which had flowed so freely, was now firmly under my control. The first test came sooner than I expected. A few days after my meeting with Mr. Davies, my phone rang. It was Sarah. I took a deep breath, picturing her smug face, and answered. "Margaret," finally, she chirped, her usual bright tone. "Listen, Thomas and I were just talking, and we've decided on our Caribbean dates. We're thinking of booking the flights next week. So, if you could just transfer the funds to our account, like you usually do for our big trips, that would be wonderful. We're looking at a pretty good deal right now." I felt a surge of adrenaline, but my voice remained calm, steady. "Sarah," I said, "I will not be funding your vacation this year." There was a beat of stunned silence on the other end. "What? What do you mean, not funding?" Her voice sharpened, losing its pleasant edge. "But you always do." "It's for the family, Margaret. You know how much we look forward to these trips." "I understand that," I replied, keeping my tone even. "However, I've decided to manage my finances differently going forward. Those funds are simply not available for a family vacation this year." But why?" she stammered, clearly thrown. "Is everything all right? Are you feeling unwell?" The sudden concern in her voice was almost comical, a transparent attempt to revert to the old dynamic. "I'm perfectly well, thank you," I said, a hint of steel entering my voice. "I've simply made a decision. You and Thomas will need to make your own arrangements for your trip." She sputtered, then hung up abruptly. I let out a slow breath, my hand trembling slightly, but a sense of triumph bubbled beneath the surface. It was done. The first boundary was set. The panic in the family was almost immediate. Thomas called me an hour later, his voice laced with a mixture of confusion and thinly veiled anger. "Mom, what's going on with Sarah? She's saying you're not paying for the Caribbean trip. Is this some kind of joke?" "No, Thomas, it's not a joke," I stated. "I told Sarah, I've made changes to my financial planning. I will not be funding your vacation." "But Mom, we've already told Jacob. He's so excited. You can't just pull out like this." His voice was rising, the entitlement clear. "I can, and I have," I responded firmly. "Perhaps this is an opportunity for you and Sarah to teach Jacob about saving for what he wants." He mumbled something incoherent, then hung up, clearly frustrated. I imagined the frantic conversations happening in their house, the sudden realization that their well of generosity might be running dry. The next morning, Sarah stormed over to my house, unannounced. She pounded on the door, her face flushed with anger when I finally opened it. "Margaret, what is going on? Thomas says you're cutting us off." Is this because of Jacob's birthday? Because of what I said? I was just joking. You know I love you. Her sudden display of affection was transparent, a desperate attempt to manipulate me back into my old role. I looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not a daughter-in-law I loved, but a woman who had taken advantage of me for years. Sarah, I said, my voice calm but unwavering, my financial decisions are my own. They are not up for discussion or negotiation. I've simply decided to assert my independence and redefine how I manage my resources. I step back, preparing to close the door. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have plans. Her mouth opened and closed, her usual charm completely gone, replaced by shock and fury. I closed the door gently, leaving her standing on my porch. My heart was pounding, but it wasn't from fear. It was from a newfound strength, a liberation I hadn't known I was capable of. The silence in my home, once a symbol of loneliness, now felt like a sanctuary. I was finally, truly taking back control. The confrontation with Sarah on my doorstep marked a definitive end to one chapter of my life and the beginning of another. The silence from Thomas and Sarah in the following weeks was deafening, a clear indication that my boundaries had hit home. There were no more calls demanding explanations, no more attempts at manipulation, just a void, which, surprisingly, I found myself filling with a quiet sense of peace. My old house, once a bustling hub of family activity, now felt too large, too full of ghosts of expectations and unreciprocated love. With Mr. Davies's help, I quietly put it on the market. It sold quickly, and within a couple of months, I found myself moving into a bright, cozy apartment in a vibrant part of town, closer to the park where Mrs. Henderson and I often walked. It was smaller, yes, but it was mine, unburdened by the weight of past sacrifices. I decorated my new space with intention. Family photos still adorned a shelf, but they were carefully chosen. Pictures of Tom and me, of a younger Thomas, of Jacob as a baby, moments of genuine, unadulterated joy. There were also new photos, one of me with my lifelong friend, Eloise Parker, whom I'd started meeting for coffee regularly, finally sharing the full story of my awakening. Eloise, wise and perceptive, at 72, had been a steadfast ally, encouraging me to embrace this new chapter. There was also a photo of me with my new book club members, a lively group of women I'd met through a community center. We discussed everything from literature to life, and their camaraderie was a balm to my soul. I'd also joined a local gardening group, finding joy in the simple act of nurturing life, something I'd always done for my family, but now did for myself. Life without their constant demands was surprisingly liberating. I had more time, more energy. I traveled to visit Eloise's sister in Arizona, something I'd always put off. I took a pottery class, something I'd always wanted to try. My days were filled with my own interests, my own choices. Meanwhile, I heard snippets of news about Thomas and Sarah, usually through Mrs. Henderson, whose daughter was friends with one of Sarah's neighbors. The Caribbean trip had been canceled. Jacob's private school tuition had become a significant financial strain, and he'd had to transfer to the local public high school, something he was apparently quite upset about. Sarah's boutique was struggling without the regular injections of capital. They were, as Mrs. Henderson had so aptly put it, getting a taste of life without me. I hadn't cut Jacob out entirely. My updated will, as Mr. Davies had helped me craft, established a trust in his name, accessible when he turned 25, contingent on certain educational and personal growth milestones. It wasn't a handout, but a foundation for his future, a lesson in responsibility and self-reliance. It was my way of showing him love, not through endless financial support, but through empowerment. One sunny afternoon, I sat on my new balcony, sipping a cup of herbal tea. The city hummed softly below, a symphony of distant traffic and bird song. The air was fresh, carrying the scent of blooming jasmine from a neighbor's pot. I closed my eyes, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. There was a profound peace within me, a quiet dignity that had replaced the gnawing ache of betrayal. My family, the one I had poured my life into, was forever changed. They were grappling with the consequences of their actions, learning the hard lessons of entitlement and the true cost of disrespect. I knew there might be a rift that would never fully heal, but I also knew that I had reclaimed my narrative. I had redefined my legacy, not through anger or chaos, but through quiet strength and a steadfast commitment to my own worth. I smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. My future, once dictated by their needs, was now entirely my own, and it felt wonderfully, gloriously free.